When It Rains, I Bloom. Written by Peachy Pan. Read by Rashi. The roses were red, but they weren't supposed to be. Céline slips on their petals as she rushes to Alfred's side, thorns catching on her ankles. Alfred! She's breathless and close enough to see the blood that drips from his fingers, staining the petals around him. He lies in a patch of 3-leaf clovers, an island of green in a sea of red. She runs, and when she finally reaches his side, he's smiling at her. "Céline," he breathes. "I'm sorry. I can't always be there for you. For Mother. For Fiona. I..." He coughs violently, and the roses seem to shudder in response, growing more until he bleeds. "Alfred, please! Don't exert yourself! Here, I'll use my staff. Hold on!" She pulls him into her lap and reaches for her staff. But as it glows, nothing happens. No! This must work!" As she mutters, her mouth tastes of metal and salt, blood and tears. As if in response to her magic, the roses rise, trying to take Alfred from her. Their stems grow into vines, and their petals bloom outward, growing bigger and bigger. The petals threaten to overtake them both, like waves in an ocean. She shouts for him, summoning all her magic, as she wields her staff as a sword to cut through the roses. But there's so many, and the thorns are sharp, and her staff is as dull as a butter knife. A vine sweeps under her feet, and she falls. Will she die too? Oddly enough, Alfred dying scares her more. Just thinking his name summons a rush of emotions, but before she could process it, she feels softness surround her. And suddenly, she's in a bed, not endlessly falling an indeterminate distance. Her chest rises and falls rapidly as she closes her eyes, willing her heart to cease its gallop. She needed a cup of tea, warm in her hands and against her chest, before she could even consider going back to sleep. And that thought inspires her enough to throw off her sweaty sheets and exit her room. To quiet her mind and her breathing as she walks, Céline imagines the steps she would take to make tea. First, she'd fill the kettle and light the fire to boil the water. Next, she'd select what blend to drink while she waited for the water, perhaps a citrus. Then, she'd select a cup and pour the water over the tea leaves and let it steep. After that, "Princess Céline?" She turns with a gasp and finds Prince Alcryst staring back at her, looking even more startled than she is. "Oh no, did I surprise you? I'm so sorry." He reaches out and puts a hand on her arm to steady her. The moonlight shining through the windows highlights his apologetic expression clearly. "It's quite all right, Prince Alcryst. Don't worry. In truth, I'm sure even a mouse would startle me as I am now." It's only when she pats his hand on her arm comfortingly that he takes his hand back, and she immediately misses his warmth. "I see. Were you having some trouble sleeping?" She resumes her walk to the cafe for tea, and he falls into step beside her. "Yes, it's been a little better for a while, but ever since Flora Port..." She trails off, finding it difficult to complete her sentence. The alliance over the tea he shared with her helped her sleep greatly, and many nights she fell asleep so exhausted she didn't dream at all. But since seeing her homeland brought to ruin, and her people in despair, a restful night was, for her, a distant dream. "I'm so sorry to hear that." He sounded so sincere, it made Céline's heart ache, a feeling she chose to ignore for now. Her mind takes that moment to remind her that she's just in a simple nightgown, with her hair braided back for sleep. A bolt of horror jolts through her. She wasn't exactly the picture of Fiorini's nobility right now, but she forces herself to relax. Alcryst was not the judgmental type, not to people other than himself. He would pay it no mind, so she will follow suit. She offers him a wan smile as they arrive at the cafe. "I was going to have some tea. Would you care to join me?" "I'd love to." Her smile becomes more genuine at that. She hadn't pictured a companion helping her with the process of making tea, but her and Alcryst fall into an easy rhythm. She stokes the fire while he fetches the water, and when she turns around with the tea leaves ready, he's already set out a cup for each of them. The lights in the cafe are warm and bright, and she feels herself begin to relax. It's when he's pouring the tea that she speaks, placing the spice tin next to his cup, while he tops off her cup. "You're up late as well, Prince Alcryst. Did you also have nightmares?" He shakes his head, setting the water aside as he grabs a spoon to scoop the spices. "I just finished my shift for guard duty, actually. I was just headed to my room when I bumped into you." "Goodness, I'm sorry. I had no intention of keeping you from your rest. You must be tired after keeping watch. I mustn't keep you." She looks down at her tea, warm in her hands. The steam is gentle on her face as she takes it in, willing herself to breathe deeply. "Princess Céline, there's no need to apologize." Alcryst's voice is gentle as he finishes mixing his spices and shuts the tin. "It always takes me a while to fall asleep after keeping watch, and a cup of tea would really help me unwind." "If that's so, then I would greatly appreciate your company." She has grown used to confiding in Alcryst after a nightmare, and his presence is perhaps even more soothing than the orange scent of her tea. "I appreciate yours as well, so I promise, it's no trouble." He gives her a tiny smile before taking a sip of his tea, eyes widening at the taste. "What a lovely flavor!" Céline beams. "Isn't it? Oranges are abundant in Firenze, so orange peel tea has always tasted like home to me." He takes another sip, nodding appreciatively. "I do remember seeing lots of oranges growing after we battled those corrupted by the border." "This particular blend is a specialty of Jean's village. I'll have to let him know you like it so much." "Please do. It's especially good with the spices. Thank you for getting those out, by the way. We always have some in our tea in Brodia. Adding them here reminds me of home as well." He smiles at her once again. His smiles were always small, like a clover in bloom, but they were all the more beautiful for it. Realizing what she just thought, Céline takes a flustered sip of her tea. She must set the cup down a little too forcefully, though, because Alcryst shoots her a concerned look. "If I may ask, what did you dream about?" His gaze is focused intently on her teacup as he refills it, as if trying not to make her feel put on the spot, and also avoiding spilling any of the water while he pours. She sighs before she responds, curling her hand around her cup, as he puts down the kettle. "Thank you, and of course you may ask. Alfred was dying, and no matter how much I healed him, it did nothing. It was rather vivid. There was lots of blood and roses, for some reason. At the end, I thought maybe I was dying too." Alcryst considers this quietly for a moment, before saying, "If only I could protect him in your dreams too." The image is a little amusing to Céline. Alcryst charging in like a knight in shining armor, getting rid of all the horrors in her mind, with either an arrow or an apology, or perhaps both, valiantly defending Alfred and her. The dream Alcryst she just conjured up in her mind certainly sounds familiar to the real Alcryst, she realizes. The thought makes her feel incredibly fond, and before she thinks better of it, she sets down her teacup and takes his hand. "Just you saying that helps so much more than you know, Prince Alcryst. Besides, I've seen you on the battlefield. You truly have protected Alfred, and everyone else around you for that matter. Seeing you fight so bravely truly warms my heart," she says softly. Alcryst turns several shades of pink, before he settles on a pleasing pinkish red. I... He cuts himself off with a breath, before continuing in a rush. Please, I don't deserve such praise, Princess Céline. You're the one whose bravery on the battlefield impresses me. He speaks sheepishly, and places his other hand on top of hers. He doesn't quite look at her, but his hands were so strong, and so warm on her own, more warm than even her tea. I think I'd like to add a little more to our alliance, Prince Alcryst, Céline says after a beat. Alcryst looks at her then, confused. What do you mean? As I said, I will protect Prince Diamant with my life. That will not change. But there's someone else very special to me I must safeguard. And that's you, Prince Alcryst. His pink cheeks have turned into a deep crimson, and she thinks her face may be on its way to match. He stammers incoherently for a few seconds before finally getting his sentence out, clearly thrown off. Princess Céline, I'm not worthy of your protection. You should put all your focus into protecting Diamant, not a weakling like me. Their hands were still joined, and he is now gripping hers quite tightly, a testament to the fervor with which he spoke. But she couldn't be swayed. You have become very dear to me, Prince Alcryst. And when I see you in battle, protecting everyone around you, I wonder, who is the one protecting you? I know Lapis and Citrine do, of course. I do not doubt them. But still, I desire to protect the one who provides me solace after nightmares. The one who swore to protect my brother, just to ease my mind. The one who makes tea with me, and for me, and the one who holds my hand so warmly. Please, will you grant me this wish? Alcryst's eyes dart to their hands, as if just remembering they existed, before going back to meet her gaze. He does not take away his hands, but she can see him retreat into himself to think, before answering. While he thinks, she becomes all too aware of her racing heart, sweaty palms, flushed cheeks. Did some of her hair come out of her braids? She resists the urge to check. On one condition, Princess Céline. Like you said, I'll continue to protect your brother. But my addition is that the other person I particularly protect is you. You provide me solace as well. Knowing I'm not alone in my worries means so much to me, and I cherish your company as well. A cup of tea tastes much better with you, you know? He gives her hands a squeeze as he finishes, smiling that tiny smile again. She is tempted to point out that him protecting her, while she protects him, might be a little tricky to execute, but she decides against it. Instead, would you care for another cup of tea? Yes, please. Sleep comes a little easier after that night. Putting extra energy into protecting Alcryst, in addition to everyone else, helps give her 110% in battle, and her mind is so exhausted even her nightmares are half-hearted and lackluster. Dream Céline was doing better than she had in a while. It helped to have her days full with not just battle, but the people she fought with, and for. Walks, not runs, in the somnial with Alfred, tea with Louis or Etienne, sitting at the campfire with Fogado and Hortensia, hearing about fairy tales from Chloe, and, of course, time spent with Alcryst. All of these small joys sustained her through her battles and her worries. Céline does her best to keep her feelings in check, to avoid feeling too happy or crying tears that did no one any favors. But all of her joys amidst the turmoil of her life, one stood out quite brilliantly. Alcryst. Ever since their last cup of tea together, she has noticed the sprightly bud of fondness she felt for him unfurling its petals from within her chest, prompting her heart to go into full bloom. Her desire to protect him makes more sense for her, thanks to that. But acting on her feelings for him during the war? Trying to work out how she'd do that sounded as pleasant as flying a Pegasus upside down. She thinks of what Alfred would do. He always acts first and thinks about it much later, so she can just picture him telling her to follow her heart. Chloe would most certainly have similar advice, and Louis would probably be full of insights based on his observations. Etienne would probably tell her to run a lap. In retrospect, Alfred might as well. What would their union even mean for Firene and Brodia? She ponders this as she braids her hair for bed, eager to sink into the soft sheets awaiting. She has woven her fingers into the other side of her hair when a tentative knock comes on her door. She pauses. The hour is late enough that a visitor at her door was quite odd. She quickly smooths out her half-finished braids. Her hair may as well look somewhat symmetrical when answering the door in a nightgown, and crosses her room to open the door a crack. "Prince Alcryst? Céline," he breathes, sounding immensely relieved. He's pale and rumpled and wearing his own nightclothes, his hair obscuring his face just a bit. She realizes he's lacking his usual hair clip. "Are you all right?" He looks so distressed. She barely even notices that he didn't even use her title. "I'm honestly not sure." "Please, come in," she offers with no hesitation, stepping aside and opening the door the rest of the way. He wavers, but relents at her raised eyebrows. She closes the door behind him and gestures for him to sit, but he doesn't seem to notice, instead moving to stand by her window. "You had a dream, I assume?" She moves to stand next to him, watching him as he looks out the window. "Alcryst?" The prompt of his name catches his attention, and he nods once. "Yes, it was a little different this time. Throughout the war, I've always dreamed of diamant, and sometimes of lapis and citrine. But lately I dream of you." "Is that so?" She keeps her voice steady, but only just. "Yes." He turns towards her, and it's then that she sees his eyes were damp. His hand shook. I had to come to you, just to make sure you were really okay. My mind couldn't rest until I laid eyes upon you." "Oh, Alcryst," Citrine says, stepping closer. She doesn't know what else to say, so she says nothing at all. When she sees that he's still shaken, she closes the distance between them and wraps her arms around his waist, head against his chest. He freezes for a moment before responding, burying his face into her hair as his arms circle her. He smells of the spices he puts into his tea, and while she's not sure how she feels about spicy tea, she definitely appreciates spices at this moment. "What would ease your worries, Alcryst?" She speaks into the darkness of her room softly, moving her head so her voice isn't muffled against his chest. "Please, know that I would do anything." He tightens his arms around her before responding. "I'm not sure if this will work perfectly, but I'm going to try it anyway." "Oh?" Céline, regretfully, steps away from him, curious. Alcryst seems to steel himself, brushing the hair out of his face before taking a breath. "Céline, I'd like to add on to our alliance again." She cocks her head. "What more is there to add?" "I want to protect you, not just as your ally, but as someone who loves you." He's crimson all over and ends the sentence as a whisper, but his eyes never leave hers. She blinks. Once, twice, and then one more time after that. She opens her mouth to respond, but he's not finished. "I know someone like me loving someone like you is ridiculous, but I just had to tell you. If I can dance at a party with Pandreo, I can stop being a coward long enough to tell you how I feel. I understand if you don't return my feelings and—" She holds up a hand to interrupt him. "And what caused you to understand that? You must know I love you too, Alcryst." Her mind is somewhat cut off with the image of him dancing at a party, but she files that image away for later, determined to take this chance that just fell on her lap. "And I don't expect you to feel the... What?" Her words stop him in his tracks, and he gapes at her, like a tall, blubbering fish. "Yes! How could I not love someone as kind and brave as you? I would think you would have realized after I vowed to protect, you know? But I suppose I didn't consider you felt the same way either." She trails off and flushes when her mind catches up the situation, but she can feel the bud in her chest going to bloom, and a joy that was in no way small. Alcryst is floundering, clearly at a loss for what to do, so Céline decides to follow her heart, for both of them. She takes his face in her hands, gently, as if she were holding the most delicate of flowers, and kisses him. There were often kisses in the fairy tales Chloe gushed about. She thought they sounded pleasant enough, but no fairy tale has prepared her for kissing Alcryst. She is a flower in bloom, drawn to the warmth of the light. He is as warm and gentle and soft as a sunbeam. His arms encircle her, just like when he hugged her and pulled her close, and when he starts to kiss her back, the warmth inside her spreads its wings. They stay like that for a while longer, and when she finally pulls back, Alcryst's smile reaches his eyes. "Perhaps you could stay here tonight," she offers, feeling a little off balance. "To soothe your nightmares, of course," she rushes to add, before he can melt into a puddle from the implication. "Are you sure? Is it really okay for me to reciprocate your feelings?" She foresees a spiel coming on, and before he can continue, she raises herself up to press a kiss to his cheek. "Of course it is. I must confess, I'm used to holding my feelings at arm's length, rather than embracing them. But when you told me how you felt, I realized I had to take a leap too." "I don't want to be a burden to you." "You could never be a burden. A burden is something you carry against your will. But I would choose to be with you every day, Alcryst. I never have to force myself to be around you, and I'll happily remind you as many times as you need." "Oh, Céline," he says. It's his turn to press a kiss to her cheek, and she can feel his smile against her. I don't know what I did to deserve you, but I do know that I'm grateful for it." "So, you'll stay?" "I'd be honored to." And that night, Céline dreamt of roses, as red as Alcryst's eyes.